Right, Mr. Otway here to talk you through the Year 11 mock exam. First question I'm going to go through quickly because it's 4 marks and that's what you need to do in the real exam. Go really quickly on the 4 markers, as I put here, 4 sentences as a rough guide so you can save yourself time for later on in the exam. Well, 2 features of the Battle of Great Fulford. If you're thinking what on earth is that? See the GCSE pod on Stamford Bridge as it has more detail. But what I would put is that the forces, the Anglo-Saxon forces at the Battle of Great Fulford were led by Edwin and Morcar because Harold Godwinson was with the main part of the army down on the south coast. Feature 2. During the battle, this is from this by the way, Harold Hardrada demonstrated his skill as a general by using Tostig's troops as a decoy in the front of his army, which helped him to gain the advantage to win the battle. Not going to spend any more on that. Let's move on. We've got bigger fish to fry. Now this is a difficult question. This probably made you stop and think. And here is the key bit of the question. You have to think about your answer and how many times you've referred your evidence back to it being something to do with giving William a greater claim to the throne of England. Now it's a tough question, but if you can answer it, it's the type of question that would give you an advantage, because all the students across all the country, if they got this in the real exam, would sit there going, well, what do we do for this? But if you know exactly what you're going to say, we're laughing. And remember, this mock exam has been designed, the whole thing has been designed with questions on topics that we think are very likely to come up. So, what would my paragraphs be about? Well, the first aspect of Harold's embassy to Normandy, which gave William a greater claim to the throne, was the fact that Harold Godwinson swore an oath over religious relics. Now, we don't know exactly what that oath said, but it's likely to have been something to do with the throne of England. Now, because Harold Godwinson swore an oath over religious relics that he broke when Edward the Confessor died, if you swear an oath and break it, you are a perjurer. And this allowed William to claim that, well, to portray Harold Godwinson as a perjurer, which in turn helped him gain the support of the Pope. If you have the support of God's representative on earth, this gives you a greater claim to the throne of England. You've got to tie everything back to this. What else would I do? Well, the second paragraph you could be about, there's a possibility Edward sent Harold to go to Normandy to confirm William as his heir, as Edward's heir. So I put the confirmation in there. Now, this is controversial and it's not definite, but if this did happen, as the Normans later claimed it did, this obviously gave William a greater claim to the throne of England because one of his key rivals was being sent to confirm that claim to the throne of England, if it happened. And finally, during the visit to Normandy, the Bayeux Tapestry suggests that William knighted Harold Godwinson, and you don't knight somebody who is your equal. It was a clever idea from William to manipulate the situation to position himself as above Harold Godwinson in the pecking order, in the social standings. And he could use that as propaganda, if you like, which he did in the Bayeux Tapestry. Propaganda is making people think or act in a certain way. Well, by knighting Harold Godwinson, it was William saying to the world, this guy is below me in the pecking order. But hey, this would be the one I'd expect you to have got. Remember, it's all got to be linked back to, especially look at the end of your paragraphs. Have you actually explained how these things gave William a greater claim to the throne? And remember, for a 12-mark question, 2 or 3 paragraphs is fine. You don't have to have done all 3. You probably struggle to think of 3. This meant that, these sort of explanations, and then, as I said there, gave William a greater claim because. And if you use key terms like perjurer, because that's going to help you. On to this one. Right, the main consequence of Normanisation of England, was that the king became more powerful. Key words again, consequence, Normanisation, king became more powerful. Have you tied everything back to whether or not it made the king more powerful? And you've got to set out your argument in a 16 marker in your introduction at the start. And you've kind of got, well, yeah, it was the main consequence. Or you could have said, no, it was, for example, the church that was more efficient was the main consequence of Normanisation. or you could say, no, it wasn't this, it was something else. But an idea I had for how you could make it more complex is you could think about the main consequence of the Normanisation of England depended on who you were, on perspective. To the people with power, to the earls, the thanes that became obviously the knights and then the tenants-in-chief, the fact that the king became more powerful was hugely important to them. But for 90% of the population who were peasants, that didn't really matter. So you could show your very clever understanding of history by answering, well, for the most powerful people in England, the Normanisation of England, for the most powerful people in England, the fact that the king became more powerful due to Normanisation was the main consequence, but 90% of people had no power at all. So for them, perhaps a bigger consequence was that the church was more efficient. That's how you can make your argument really clever in the start. But what would my paragraphs be? Well, the Normanisation of the social structure, the feudal system, that definitely gave the king vastly more power because everybody owed him something. Military service, taxation. He owned all of England. When he took over England, he declared all land was owned by him, and everybody who got land was only a tenant-in-chief and was his vassal. So that gave him huge amounts of power and was a massive consequence of Normanisation of England. But again, if you were a peasant, all that changed is before 1066, you were struggling to feed yourself and your family, and somebody was telling you what to do in Old English. After 1066, you were still struggling to feed your family and survive, and somebody was telling you what to do and pay your taxes in French instead of in Old English. So what would paragraph 2 be about? Well, I would be really keen to write about the Normanisation of the church, and that did give the king more power. His close ally Lanfranc was made Archbishop of Canterbury, which means he's going to pass on the messages that William wants him to pass on. But this isn't the main consequence of the Normanisation of the church. The church, everybody was religious or pious, as you could say. Everybody was God-fearing and went to church. And the changes in the church that Lanfranc brought along made the church more efficient and a fairer place to be. He got rid of nepotism and simony and pluralism and made sure that there were more regular church councils, which are called synods. Took greater control of the church. This would make the church be a fairer, more efficient place to worship and would affect the ordinary lives of the peasants, because the messages of Lanfranc and the Norman messages would come across more efficiently and more easily, and there would be less corruption. Now, your third paragraph, I'd probably do law and order, but you could do economy and society, I guess. I would say that the law and order actually wasn't massively Normanised, and that's fine. That's another complex argument. I would say Normanisation did not really happen in law and order because William wanted to show that he was the rightful heir to the throne of England, so he didn't just want to change everything and throw all the laws out. But he did introduce the merger and fine and the forest laws, which doesn't really give William more power so much as show how much power he had gained as a result of the social structure and to some extent the church changes. And I would say that the consequence of the bits of Normanisation of law and order was not that it gave the king more power. Actually, it was the fact that it gave the king a bit less power, because the biggest change that came about with law and order was the introduction of the church courts, which was effectively William letting go of control of one aspect of law and order and not becoming more powerful. And that's another way you can have a bit of a complex argument. So, did you use these terms, consequence, Normanisation, king and powerful? Did you focus on the question? You would have had to use these, again, tying everything back, especially at the end of paragraphs in your intro and your conclusion, to this idea of the king becoming more powerful because of Normanisation. And that's your 16 marker, and that's the end of part 1.